Good morning to everyone. We are going just to wait a couple of minutes and then we will start. Thank you. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar organized within the joint action PreventNCD, in particular under the work area control and counter the effects of advertisements and online marketing, which is part of a work package on regulation and taxation for NCD prevention in Europe. And my name is Maria João Gregório, and I am leading this work area on restrictions of harmful marketing within this joint action. And I am from the General Directorate of Health in Portugal. And it is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this session addressing a topic of growing relevance. And we will discuss how to monitor and regulate the marketing of unhealthy food in the digital environment. And I would like to thank our speakers for accepting our invitation and for taking the time to join us today. And considering this section, we know that digital platforms have significantly transformed the way food marketing reaches consumers, particularly children and teens, and advertising is now increasingly personalized, immersive, and often difficult to identify, creating significant challenges for both public health monitoring and regulatory action. And the objectives of today's sessions are to explore methodological approaches to monitor exposure to food marketing in online environments, to share practical experiences and innovative tools, including the use of artificial intelligence, and also to reflect on the European policy context, in particular on how the Digital Services Act can contribute to creating safer digital spaces for children. And we will begin with two complementary presentations from the CLICKBITE study. And for that, we will have with us Dr. Madalena Mook, research fellow at the Open University. We will present the methodology and the main findings related to monitoring food marketing exposure in Ireland. And this will be followed by Professor Mimi Tatla-Golden, also from the Open University, who will address advertisers' perspectives on digital food marketing and the implications for the design of effective regulation. We will then turn to the practical application of technology with Dr. Charlotte Jeton and Nora Lorenzo from Scienceano in Belgium, who will present the use of artificial intelligence and KidAd App to identify a healthy food marketing targeted at children. And to conclude this session and to connect research and practice with the European regulatory framework, Catherine Hermitage, Legal and Policy Officer for Advertising at the European Commission, will reflect on online advertising and the Digital Services Act, highlighting its potential role in promoting child protection and public health. And following the presentations, we will open the floor for the joint discussion and questions from the audience. And we strongly encourage you to share reflections, raise questions, and we can use the chat function for that. And please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Joint Action PreventNCD YouTube channel. And before inviting our speakers, I will briefly introduce the contribution of the Joint Action Prevent NCD to this field. Within this joint action, the work on digital marketing focuses improving Europe's capacity to monitor, to understand, and also to regulate harmful digital marketing. And in this context, the joint action aimed to analyze and test tools to monitor digital marketing, including innovative and technology-based approaches to better capture the scale, nature, and dynamics of online harmful marketing. We also aim to provide up-to-date evidence to support better informed decision-making at the national and also at the European level. We aim to generate evidence on children exposure to digital marketing, combining objective exposure data with self-reported information in order to better understand the marketing practices and their potential impact. We'd also like to explore the regulatory and monitoring opportunities in the digital environment to provide tailored support and training to the participating countries, helping to improve national capacity to implement legislation and to deploy monitoring tools in this area. And also our last aim is to raise awareness of harmful digital marketing among policymakers, different stakeholders, and also the general population. So with no further delay, I am pleased to give the floor to Dr. Madalena Mook. Madalena Mook is a research fellow at the Open University and a member of the WHO Technical Advisory Group on Brand Marketing. And she holds a PhD in biological anthropology from the University of Coimbra. Her research focuses on the impact of digital marketing on children's health and behavior, and she has played a leading role in major international projects such as the CLICKBITE and also Best Remap, a previous joint action in this area, trying to develop innovative tools to monitor how brands target young audiences across the digital media. So please, Madalena, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for having me here. I will try to very briefly talk about the monitoring and the current methods and ways to monitor unhealthy marketing in digital media. We only have 15 minutes, and as we know from the last joint action, we had a 2 days workshop, and that wasn't enough to pass all the information, so it really will be very superficial. So if you will need any more detail, we'll have to follow it up, and feel free to contact me. Let me see. Can you see the slides changing? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with why do we monitor food marketing? So first of all, of course, for the research to understand how it affects children and how much they see, but very importantly also for policy. And in policy, we do it at various stages. So first one is to for the advocacy. So we have really good and solid evidence-based arguments to introduce the policy and to make the policy design so we know which types of marketing we should cover and how in our legislation so it is effective. And then of course to evaluate the compliance, so to see if the industry is complying with the regulation currently in place, but also then to evaluate the effectiveness of the policy. So even if they are following the regulation that is currently in place, is it protecting children sufficiently, or is there a need to update and strengthen the legislation? And then finally, especially due to the dynamic character of digital media and advertising, we need to monitor to validate the tools we have. So we have to constantly be checking the tools and evaluating them and checking if they are still fit for purpose to measure children's exposure and enforce our policy. So what do we mean when we say we monitor unhealthy food marketing? What do we really monitor most of the time? So of course, extent. So how much do children see and how often do they see unhealthy food marketing? The nature of it. So what are the creative appeals and creative strategies used in the marketing that are specifically appealing to customers? And a lot of the times we are measuring, is it checking if it's targeted at children or appealing to children, because that is often written into legislation. We are measuring the healthiness because we want to restrict unhealthy food marketing in the first place, and therefore measure how much of what children see is eligible and should be marketed to them, and then the impact it has on the population. To define what is unhealthy in terms of food, we have the nutrient profile models, the WHO or PAHO nutrient PAHO nutrient profile model. We have the Nutri-Score, and usually along the major ones that you would use for international comparison, you would use your national nutrient profile model or any guideline that you have in the country, so you can have a national context of your results, of course. And then we have two situations. What do we do when there are multiple products featured in one ad? This one is usually easier because even if at least one product feature is unhealthy, the whole ad would not be eligible to be marketed to children. The more challenging situation is when there is no product feature, or the product is not identifiable down to a product level. And then this is where the legislation and monitoring faces challenges. That's why we have the technical advisory group. So we'll be able to hopefully by the end of the year produce the report that will advise the member states on how to approach brand marketing. It all seems kind of easy in theory, identifying the product and then the healthiness, but then we go online and we see an advertisement like this. So we can see a Burger King's owned post, and you can see a burger on it. it's not mentioned anywhere which burger it is. You know, it's the Dr. Pepper, but we don't know what the burger is. You can look at it and you can have a really good guess. So you're usually going onto the website and you're trying to see what does this burger look like. So you can nutrient profile and check if it should be marketed to children. And then you're going to the Burger King website and you have, you know, it's a Whopper or a plant-based Whopper, and they look exactly the same. So you're hitting a wall, and despite having very clearly product displayed in the advertisement, you are not really able to identify it down to one specific product that you can use nutrient profile model to explore eligibility. And this currently in the UK, due to the exclusion of brand marketing and the classification of brand marketing that we have, is a big issue, because this, if there wasn't a Dr. Pepper on it, would be a brand marketing, because you cannot pin it down to one specific product, and it wouldn't be covered in legislation. Then the next thing you want to know, is it even marketing? Because not everything that's branded will be marketing from the policy point of view. So as much as in the research we are interested in any branded exposure because it will impact children, not everything will be under the scope of legislation. So the most obvious types that will be in under the scope of legislation is the paid marketing. So the one that will have clear disclosure, that is an ad and it is sponsored, promoted, and sometimes not as clear as we would want it. Then there is owned marketing that should clearly be considered a marketing. It's the marketing that brands are posting on their own social media pages or their own spaces like websites. So for example, if the Burger King, Coca-Cola, they have their own Instagram page and whatever they post there, but they do not pay for it to be promoted and appear independently on targeted audience feed, it will be owned marketing. Then influencer marketing, one that is very powerful and very popular, but very poorly defined, because we really don't have a uniform and agreed definition of who is an influencer and what would be influencer marketing. So we're kind of assuming it's a person with substantial amount of followers that can make a difference and make an impact, and a person that is very clearly featuring a food product in order to promote it. And it can be with a disclosure, but very often they do not disclose. So it is a lot of the times down to our decision making if we think we would classify it for research as marketing. For policy, this has to be a very strictly defined term. So other branded exposures, although they are not likely to be included in policy, but they have impact on children's behavior and preferences, will be the user generated. So anything that is generated by small independent users, a lot of the times contacts, but not always. They are not always independent from the brand's activity, because a lot of the times the brand's campaigns are aimed at creating user generated content. So they will have campaigns that will ask you to create a video with their product, make a challenge, and it would be posted by a user. However, it will be encouraged by the brand. Then there is branded food in other content like in entertainment, that was not placed there most of the time for commercial purposes, but it's still branded exposure. And there are others which are very difficult to even identify because we don't know who posted them. Now, the question when we want to verify what is targeted or directed at children, especially in digital media. So first of all, we have to define children. And a lot of the times when we talk about child-directed and targeted content, we're thinking about the child on the bottom of the screen. However, according to UN Children's Rights, and also according to the guidance from WHO, child that we want to protect from harmful marketing is any person under the age of 18, which means the person on the top is also a child, and the marketing targeted at them should also be restricted, and they should be protected. But what does it really mean? Because I think a lot of the times when we're thinking child-directed marketing, we're thinking about the characters, we're thinking about font and colorful design. However, especially in digital media, this is much more complex because there are various ways in which the marketing can be targeted. So one of it is placement. So if it's placed in social media that children use, in the games and apps that children use, this will be targeted at them through the media. It will be targeted at them through the design. So this is what we were talking about, the attractive colors, catchy music, oversized foods, attention-grabbing pictures, a wider content such as presence of celebrities, the language that is a teen or child language, the themes, activities, and incentives like promotions, competitions, something that is new, something that is a new product or limited edition, something that is buy 3 pay 2, or any price promotion will be targeted at young people because they themselves said that this is something that is highly appealing to them. And finally, everything in digital media and everything that children see in digital media, everything that anyone sees in digital media, especially social media, is targeted at them in some ways. So if it got to their screens, it's already been targeted at them because everything they see is based on an algorithm. And although social media platforms technically cannot use the age as the targeting criteria, so they cannot make an ad and then put in their targeting options, show it to children under 18, they can target the young people, teenagers and children through the interest. So if they will say, show this to the audience that's specifically interested in this pop culture or this artist, it will reach them through their interest, even if not their age. So we should think about whatever is targeted at children in digital media much wider than what we imagine when we're classifying, for example, the food packaging. And now on to the monitoring method. So the picture you see on the screen is the real footage of me monitoring unhealthy food marketing to children. So this is very often where we still are. And unfortunately, it can be quite time consuming and resource consuming process, but we are getting better at, and hopefully we're going to get to the point when some things will be facilitated. So the methods that are commonly used and those that we've been using, we follow the CLICK framework by WHO. So the CLICK framework is part of a wider package of WHO protocols and templates. So the wider package includes also TV and outdoors and the general media use. And then within the internet section of the protocols, we have the CLICK framework that is specific to digital food marketing, right? So we have 5 steps in the CLICK WHO framework. The first one is to comprehend the digital ecosystem, so to understand what children's media, preferred social media are, where children are in digital spaces, how they use it. The landscape of campaigns is analyzing the campaigns that the brands are preparing to reach the audience and the ways in which they want to appeal. Investigate exposure and capture on screen are the 2 steps that use actual exposure, and they are measuring children's unhealthy exposure to unhealthy food marketing as they use their devices. And then knowledge exchange to take this knowledge and make a difference through advocacy and translate it into policy, hopefully. So again, what is a potential exposure? It's a term you would hear a lot once you go into the monitoring of digital food marketing. So there's 2 ways in which we can measure, or not measure, which we can study what children see in digital media. So one is we need the source of information of what are children's or adolescents' preferred social media platforms, and what are the food brands that they are likely to see or follow as they use the social media. So you usually would have some kind of survey or some kind of external source that will give you this information. And once you have the information, you're then going to these social media platforms that are popular among them, which usually these days would be, TikTok and Instagram, maybe Snapchat. And you're looking for the pages of the brands that that children might be exposed to or might be popular among children. So you're selecting the brands and you're going through the posts, so through the owned marketing of these brands, and you're checking what kind of food is promoted to children by these brands, how it is promoted, what are the methods they use, what are the strategies they use to appeal to them, and you analyze that. So what you can see on screen is from our CLICKBITE report. We've checked the landscape of digital food marketing of children in the island of Ireland, and we found, for example, that the use of memes and the trends on internet are is very common among the brands, and there you can see 3 different brands using the same popular meme to appeal to young people and children. These kind of things are very appealing to young people. Then the actual exposure. So it's the only one that really will tell us how much children see when they use their own digital media. So we have published recently a paper that is analyzing all of the methods that can be used to study unhealthy food marketing that children actually see. So I've provided a code for that. You can look through it. But for now, the best method we have is screen capture, which consists of asking children to either download a software on their phones or meeting with them and recording their screens as they are using their social media, and then analyzing the actual recording of their screens to see what kind of marketing and how much they see as they use it. So we've used this method in our CLICKBITE project from on the island of Ireland. So today I will only give you an insight into the screen capture results. However, we follow the throughout the Click framework, so you can see the whole report and the other results. This is our lovely team led by Mimi Tatlo-Golden and collaborators from Galway and wider collaborators. So we had a really good group of experts involved. And as I said, we've captured the screens. We had 38 children involved, teenagers between 13 and 17 years old, and we've calculated their exposure. What we found was that as children view their own social media, they will be exposed to unhealthy food marketing every 3 minutes. And this was using very conservative definitions of what we would say. So this is not all branded content. This is only the marketing that is paid marketing, very clearly, very clear influencer marketing and owned marketing. So we think this is pretty striking, and assuming that they would use 2 hours of social media a day, which is an underestimation in my opinion, they would be exposed to around 14,000 unhealthy food ads per year. And that is comparing to only 1 healthy food ad every 25 minutes. So this was the difference between the exposure to healthy and unhealthy. So it is strongly dominated by unhealthy brands and products. Brand marketing consisted of around 15%, and very unsurprisingly, it were the large international brands that dominated the landscape. When we looked at the types of marketing, I think it was pretty, I think all of them were pretty common and frequent. However, the paid ads were still the most frequent type of ads, together with the influencer marketing. There were various very appealing methods used by the brands in the marketing that children saw. The most common was, of course, the appeal to taste, but also the presence of brand logos, of course. Celebrity endorsement was one of the top appeals that we found in children's feeds, and it included a lot of sports celebrities, which is a health washing on top of that. Then there were a lot of recipes used by the brands, encouraging people to incorporate their products which were unhealthy into their meals or into, for example, a breakfast routines. Appeals to friendship, enjoyment, satisfaction, humor. Although we did not define which of that would be child appealing, you can see that a lot of this would be very appealing to children, especially adolescents that are between 13 and 17 who actually saw this marketing on their feed. And then we check the recall and engagement. So as they were scrolling through their feed, we were also checking how do they engage with the marketing they see. So we saw that, and can they recall anything of what they saw? So directly after the recording, we asked them, do you remember seeing any branded content, or do you remember seeing any food marketing on your feed as you just watched it? And even after our prompts with types of marketing or brands, they only recalled under 30% of what they saw as they were using social media, which means a lot of the processing of the marketing will be subconscious and will not be recalled. So if you will then try to measure children's exposure based on their recall, you will be underestimating by far. And then with the engagement, we found that nearly 30% of branded food content got some kind of engagement from children. Most of them were liking the post or clicking on the post to, for example, see the comments or extend it. Most frequently interacted types of marketing was user-generated, which is the content that really flies under the radar in terms of exposure, and they do not clearly identify it as marketing exposure. And of course, influencer marketing, which once again shows this is a very powerful and common strategy out there. And only around 7.5% of paid ads had some interaction, and 26% of owned marketing had interaction. So children, when they can clearly identify something and see it as an interaction, they're less likely to interact with it. However, those that are a bit less clear, they get high engagement from children. And it also showed in the time that they spent viewing the content, where they only spent on average around 3 seconds viewing the paid ads, and 5 times longer, average of 15 seconds viewing influencer content. So they stayed much longer on this content and they engage with it much more frequently. And what makes it much more powerful than anything else, and probably something we should focus on more in terms of policy and enforcement. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madalena, for that insightful presentation. And I would like to remind all participants that you are welcome to use the chat to share questions and comments, because we are going to have the discussion at the end of all the presentations. So it is now my great pleasure to give the floor to Professor Mimi Tatla-Golden. Professor Mimi Tatla-Golden is a professor of interdisciplinary studies of childhood and youth, and co-director of the Center for Children and Young People's Wellbeing at the Open University. And she is a key expert on harmful digital marketing that affects children's health and well-being. And she led a landmark World Health Organization report on digital food marketing, and serves as an expert advisor to UNICEF and the European Commission. So please, Mimi, the floor is yours. And thank you so much for joining us today. I think Marta will share your presentation.
Thank you.
And
yeah, that's
we are
great.
able
Thank
to
you
see
so
it.
much. Yeah, thank you, Maria Schwab, for that lovely introduction. And what I'm going to be doing here today, and delighted to see so many people here at this event, is to share some more findings from this CLICKBITE study that Magda was just talking to you about, the exposure, so from our screen capture findings in the study. So this was a study that implemented many elements of the WHO CLICK framework across the island of Ireland. So the Republic of Ireland, an EU member state, as well as Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. And I'm going to focus on the findings in relation to advertisers, because we managed to speak in really, really frank conversations with 15 advertisers who all work in this.
Mimi, I think we are having some connection problems.
Yeah. Are we okay now?
Yes,
Yeah,
I think
can we
now
go on to the
it's
next slide?
perfect.
Great, great. Wonderful. And so that's a version of the summary of the study that that Magda just showed as well. And you can see there under L for landscape of campaigns, you can see that we confidentially interviewed 15 advertisers as part of this wider study that gives us very many different angles on children's exposure to and engagement with food marketing in digital media. So the next slide, please. So I'm going to take you through quickly the our goals and how we did it, a little summary of our main themes, and then these key themes that we extracted from our conversations with advertisers around unease, targeting, and regulation. And the next slide. And so we have a climate of self and co-regulation, both in Ireland and the UK, although just now, as of January in the UK, there's a new legislative regime that will restrict online food marketing for many instances, but certainly not all of them. But this was still imminent at the time that we conducted these interviews. And they were nice, deep interviews that advertisers gave us about an hour each, and we provided them with promises of complete confidentiality and anonymity, and they spoke with us, as I say, really very, very frankly. And you can see there the kind of key areas that we wanted to explore with them. Next slide. And so these were almost all very senior executives with sort of 10 to up to 30 years experience at 11 different agencies, but who also had experience around the world in kind of major advertising markets outside Ireland. And they represented agencies who engaged in very different kinds of elements of the marketing, as you can see there, agencies with different characteristics, and their personal experience spanned kind of everything from the more client size and account management to creative and copywriting elements. And crucially also, we had a couple of substantially, less experienced, but actually extremely skilled digital advertisers who gave us a lot of insight into how that field is growing so fast. And as you can see, these people have experience marketing the kinds of target unhealthy products that we are interested in restricting the marketing of in a lot of our work. Next slide. Thank you. So the key themes we can see on the next slide then. That from the advertisers' perspectives, these were the most important platforms, and this absolutely was in line and was very reassuring to us because these were the platforms that the screen capture, the young people who we had had participating in the screen capture, these were the platforms that we extracted data from that they chose to engage in as well. What we didn't explore was gaming and mobile apps. So I should remind you that the numbers that we talk about in our screen capture element that Magda, so an ad every 3 minutes, and multiplying that up over a year, that these really underestimate really substantially the amount of exposure children as a group are likely to have. And not just gaming, but also the mobile apps for various people, so delivery, as well as just apps for the food brands, which we heard about in the interviews that we conducted with young people. And these are giving them constant nudges to consume such products. The advertisers said we're talking about connection, emotions, and what they described as endorphins and gooey feelings. So really all about the social and emotional side of advertising impact, which I think is a lesson to those of us who engage in regulation. Those of you who know me will know that since, the 2016, I've been working with WHO on this, and I've been talking constantly about the importance of remembering the role that emotion plays, and not just to think about cognitive capacity to see that this is an ad, but in fact to understand that the impact goes way beyond that, and that regulating emotion in relation to advertising is a much bigger challenge than just teaching children to understand this is an ad. So the advertisers described strategies that placed unhealthy food as a carrier of identity for young people, ironically of well-being, of their peer relationships, and even of self-care. So they would talk about it as a way to comfort themselves, as a badge of honor to eat junk food as a young person, in contrast to what adults advise. And then the advertisers talked about this interesting idea of what they called the double dopamine. So the dopamine effect of thinking about eating unhealthy foods, and then posting about it into your peer group and getting like a whammy of an effect. Particularly, they focused on influencers and the power of mega, but crucially also micro influencers. And they spoke really openly about how their role they see now is of one of generating more and more user-generated content. And this is an area that really provides challenge to regulation. If we think that we're talking about something that is about, you know, a discrete ad created by a company that is placed somewhere. No, we're looking at a completely different phenomenon now in which a very wide-ranging networked conversation is taking place. And this parasocial world in which not just influencers, but also brands are themselves building relationships with individuals via social media, including young people. So the next slide, please. And indeed, that was last year, the Cambridge Dictionary's word of 2025. So this idea of feeling this sense of connection to someone who you don't know, but who feels very meaningful to you. Absolutely crucial for us to address. And I see that there's some nice work coming out of Europe these days on influencers, and it's something we need to pick up with a lot of energy. Next slide, please. So here's an example of just one influencer and how, you know, the Oreo type mug cake, which several advertisers spontaneously mentioned, you know, I work in this area, but suddenly my child is saying to me, I want to make an Oreo mug cake. And so the way that these ideas spread through the internet, kind of like wildfire, really, and get many, many millions of views. Okay, next, please. So overall, as the advertisers were describing this landscape that they all actively work in, I should say, what came through was really striking, was this really strong sense of unease that they had around it. As they spoke about it, they would describe the enjoyment and the challenge of new media and what it offered. And then they would reflect more and say, well, it is sinister, it's inescapable. We do follow the rules, they emphasized, but there are so many loopholes. And then we talked about targeting at length, and I'll come back to that in a moment, and then about regulation, apologies. Next slide, please. So for unease, and on to the next slide. These are the words, and I'll leave you to just scan them quickly. These are the words from 13 of the 15 advertisers we interviewed that they used to describe the social media world of advertising unhealthy products. And considering these are the people who are creating this content, I think this is quite it's quite a striking perspective on what is actually going on when they reflect on what it means in relation to young people and unhealthy products. Okay, next slide. And a lot of them came to talk first as advertisers, but then reflect of their role as a parent. And then they would say, as an advertiser, there are certain things that are exciting, a whole new world, but then as a parent, there are things that are definitely scary. And I think that this element of speaking to people as parents and opening up this world to them more effectively is something that we could be doing more of. The next slide. In relation to targeting, and then the next slide, please. They kind of went back and forth on this a lot. First, they said, absolutely, we are not allowed to target, so to select an under 18 age from a drop-down menu in a social media targeting selection. But then they would say, but yes, they're definitely exposed. And apart from anything else, I know this because my own child comes to me with all of these requests that I know nothing about even though I work in advertising. And so they say it's not just parents' devices or the fact that children may have different social media ages, but also mobile apps and all kinds of different elements of their internet use that will affect what they were describing crucially as the meta retargeting pixel, meaning that content gets directed to them if they're in any way in a network where people have been using these devices. Then they started to unpack the division, the distinction between targeting and reaching, and saying we don't actively target, but this one advertiser said sort of artlessly, they don't need to be influenced like that with direct targeting from us. There's other ways. Another way is to use like influencers. So they will say we don't target, but we will appoint an influencer, and we know that influencer is influential with young people. So again, another kind of pointer to how important it is to address this element. They talked about targeting around the design and the creative content of ads and of packaging. And this is absolutely crucial because even if the ads aren't sent directly to young people in certain limited ways, the visual appeal of them will mean that they'll reach them in other ways. They talk quite openly about if we want to reach teens, we target 18 to 24. Because we know that's a wide group, that teens are interested in the same things that 18 to 24-year-olds are interested in. And by the end of these conversations, they were saying, but look, you need to understand, which is, this point that we do keep trying to make, that everything is targeted in digital. You don't just put random stuff in there. You're always trying to reach specific groups. And they talked in particular about how TikTok made it very, very easy for them. Next slide, please. So 3 of them on this sort of unsaid thing. Well, look, I've not been in a meeting where we sat around and said, okay, great, we can target them. But everybody knows it's sort of it's the unsaid thing. It's funny. Yeah, this advertiser number 13 said, you've got me thinking about it now. And they realize that this assumption is in their work atmosphere, even though it's not expressly articulated. And then another one says, I've never heard anyone say, let's make this appeal to a younger audience. And then they contradict themselves in the same sentence, unless it was TikTok or you're going TikTok is the place if you're going after the kids. Yeah. And another one said, I think when brands work with creators who have their interest categories aligned with young people, they know what they're doing. And this is what we assume, as people who critique the industry. It's something that's consistently denied by representatives of the industry, but in confidential interviews, they were quite frank about it. Next slide, please. And they say it's sort of slippery, slimy, backhanded, but we all kind of know that it happens behind the scenes. All right, next slide, please. Another one tested the system, so they took a new phone, put up TikTok, said we're 13 with a dummy ID, and they said the first 10 ads that were shown to this person who had never engaged with TikTok, 7 of them were for unhealthy items. And then he said they go on to just test you in batches, so if you respond to any of this, then you get more and more and more. And his view was it's so subtle that a kid isn't going to discern it. This is an advertiser who has children in sort of below 12 as well as over 12, and who had done some research themselves with young people and said, we were asking, do you see ads? And they were saying no. And he concluded that this wasn't accurate, that children were receiving ads but not consciously processing them. But we know that the research shows that we don't need to be consciously processing and recalling ads to be influenced by them. Next slide. All right, but last of all on regulation, thank you. So as they all pointed out, this is an ungoverned space. There are a couple of rules. They're not followed that well in their view, even though they all said we follow the rules, but a lot of people don't. Several of them blamed the platforms where they say all the power lies and there is no responsibility. And the next slide. And their views when asked, how do we balance the needs of different stakeholders in this area? most of them said, look, in the end, we need to think about children and about the future of the population. And that's something that needs to be addressed. There shouldn't be any other balance other than considering how we protect children. And then you can see how they're sort of talking themselves around in circles. There's one saying there's not necessarily anything wrong with appealing to children. And then within the same sort of paragraph of reflection, she comes to the idea of targeting and children in the same sentence just doesn't sit right with me. So I think the conclusion that I came to after these deep conversations with advertisers was that they were comfortable with the work that they were doing, but less so once we had these deeper conversations about what was actually going on. Next slide, please. Okay, so finally on regulation. They concluded that they would accept or welcome legislation. There's this sense that, look, if you make the rules, we will follow them. We're advertisers, we're smart, we can create change, we can work with change that government creates, but we just need that level playing field. You can't expect some people to be ethical while others aren't doing that. And so really their sense was this is something that government must work on. We need more understanding among policymakers. We believe, the advertisers said, that the public and certainly parents, including ourselves, would welcome this. They emphasized education and communication and that the role that has, but crucially stressed that if you've got a media landscape that's absolutely saturated with one kind of message, which is eat these unhealthy foods, you're not going to get messages about healthy behaviors to land. They just can't compete. So you have to clear the landscape a little bit. Brand marketing must absolutely be included, more focus on influencers and platforms. There will be pressure from industry. But their general view was, from our point of view as advertisers, industry might consider themselves under threat, but as advertisers, we're creative and we'd find ways around it. So it's not as if they're saying, our industry will be over. Okay, next slide, please. And this is the last one. So the level playing field from clear legislation was what advertisers were asking for, needing leadership from government and policymakers. The brand marketing exclusion. So if you allow an ad that shows a brand, a brand image but not a food image, meaning that it can't be nutrient profiled and therefore the ad is permitted under current laws, or self-regulation mechanisms. This renders most advertising regulation entirely pointless because the brands are so well known and children engage with them before they can speak. And so it means that they're just constantly being sort of topped up, if you like, with inputs. We need to be looking in particular to influencers, parasocial effects, user-generated content, and the algorithmic role of platforms, crucially. And it's inevitable. We need to contend with industry lobbying. We just need to be brave, just as had to be the case for tobacco. This is a particularly salient conversation in Ireland because Ireland was the first country that banned smoking in workplaces and led to a radical change across Europe of smoking practices, including in entertainment places. And the general consensus from advertisers was, look, we'd work this out somehow, so don't worry about us. Our industry will survive. So that's it from me. I think the next slide just has my contact details on it. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm really happy to answer any questions. I know I've rattled through that. These were very, very rich conversations, but I'm happy to expand on any of that if anybody has any questions at the end. Thank you so much for having me.
Many thanks, Mimi, for these very interesting results showing that advertisers welcome legislation. So this is great to have this kind of data. So we will have questions and discussion at the end. So we now move to the Belgian experience. and I am pleased to welcome Charlotte Chouton and also Nora Lorenzo from Sciensano. And Charlotte is a scientific collaborator at Sciensano, holding a PhD in food and nutrition from the University of Barcelona, and a master in public health nutrition from the University of Southampton. And her work focuses on digital health monitoring using artificial intelligence, and in particular also using the KidAd App. And Nora Lorenzo is a scientist at Sciensano with a Master of Public Health from the University of Porto and a degree in Human Nutrition and Dietetics from the University of Barcelona. And her research addresses digital marketing, food environments, and also nutrition policy. And she is a key researcher in the KidAd study in Belgium. So please, the floor is yours. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Maria Joa. Do you see my presentation?
Yes, but not in the presenter mode.
Perfect.
It is not
Let me arrange
in the
that.
full screen. Now it's perfect.
Now?
Many
Okay,
thanks.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk about the KidAd study that we carried out in Belgium and of our little experience in that. So first, to give you a little bit of context, in Belgium, marketing is framed by industry self-regulated policy. So it started in 2012 with the launch of the Belgian Pledge, which aimed at banning advertisement for children under 12 years old, with defined nutritional criteria, and it covered a different channel, including TV, company website, primary schools. And the important part to know is that it was voluntary, meaning that companies could decide to sign or not, and 32 companies signed it up. And what we see is that over time, the Belgian pledge evolved, more channels were included, more companies also signed up, nutritional criteria became slightly stricter. To arrive in January 2026 to become the Belgian Food Advertising Code that now has increased the ban, the advertising ban up to 16 years old, and that also extend now to all companies and retailers with some stricter rules for social media and influencer marketing. But it's important to say also that, for example, the nutritional criteria is not as stringent as the WHO nutrient profile model, and that because it's based on nutritional criteria, while some advertisement can be forgotten, like for example, brands or character brands can not be included. Okay, so in 2025, so not so long ago, we finished the data collection of the KidAd study. So the idea is that it has three objectives. One is to assess the exposure and persuasive power of social media marketing of unhealthy products among adolescents, to compare the effectiveness of different nutritional classification, including the Belgian Pledge, the WHO nutrient profile model, the NOVA classification, but also the Nutri-Score in limiting adolescent exposure to unhealthy products online, and also to validate an artificial intelligence tool designed to detect advertising of unhealthy product to simplify a little bit the data analysis around that. So the expected target population was 150 adolescents aged between 13 and 17 years old, and we would cover the different social media, including Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, Pinterest, and former Twitter. And the expected impact was about, first, to provide objective data to inform policymakers and public health stakeholders on the extent of this marketing, to support the development also and evaluation of public health policy designed to protect minors against harmful marketing, and also to potentially establish a consistent methodology for periodic monitoring. So for that, we used the KidAd App. So the KidAd App is a tool that was designed by the World Health Organization, and so the idea is to install the application on the adolescent smartphone, and this application can capture screenshots on selected social media apps, so the one that I told you before, and you can decide the settings that you're going to use for your research, and we decided to having it record like screenshot every 1 or 2 seconds over 7 days. So thanks to this methodology, we could assess real-life exposure under natural conditions. It would also enable us to measure passive and active marketing exposure, so not only the marketing they engage or notice, but also like the passive marketing, so the one that they scroll through, they don't pay attention to it, but somehow they are still influenced by it. And also, it does not encourage or promote social media use because it was in natural condition. But with this great tool came also great challenges, especially in terms of data protection, ethical clearance, and also participant acceptability in participating in this study, because it can feel quite invasive to have a tool that is on your phone taking a screenshot of whatever you see on social media. So what we noticed with these challenges, and that usually they are quite interconnected. So for example, what we could see is that data protection was a major aspect to tackle, and we could see that, for example, with the support of our DPO in going through different process, data register process, what legal basis to choose, also being absolutely transparent on the risk relative to using this app, we could also get more easily ethical clearance. We could also see that the fact to get ethical clearance was absolutely helping in getting parents' trust in having their children participating to the study. So everything is somehow a little bit interconnected to being able to operationalize the study, and something that should not be overlooked is also like the acceptability part. What was really helpful for us was the fact that we had the school trust and support in carrying out the study to be absolutely transparent and having clear objective towards the adolescents, so what we aim to achieve, and also to be available for them to have to answer any questions or any doubts that they had regarding to the study. So in terms a little bit of data protection, the good part with the KidAd tool is that, so first of all, sorry, what you can see here is like the data processing workflow, like what we use a little bit, so where the data came from and how they were used, and what were the measures to protect the participant. And for example, the KidAd app has really good protection measure. For example, inside the application, you can see that there is, for example, selective monitoring. It will not take screenshots of applications that are not predefined. You can also decide to blacklist some part of the images. So if you don't want to get some images, it's also possible. And there was also a part that was content screening for harmful images, for example, related to sex or related to suicide. More at the level of the server design, at the Sensano server, it offered also the possibility to blur the faces on the images, so that was also quite a good protection measures. And finally, because we also decided to use an AI to help us to simplify the data analysis, it was also very important to define a little bit the role around it in terms of data protection. And it was decided with our DPO that an AI installed locally and not open was a better solution for us. So this is a little bit it in terms of data protection. And I will give the floor to Nora for a bit more the acceptability and recruitment.
Thank you, Charlotte. So regarding the recruitment for the study, so as Charlotte mentioned, it was conducted last year prior to the new regulation, well, the self-regulation of the industry. So we tried to get as many high schools in Brussels city as possible. Unfortunately, it was a very busy period as well. So we got 2 schools which were very committed to the study as well. Which gave us a pool of around 1,200 participants that were open, well, that were in the schools itself. Then from our side, we conducted awareness raising sessions about digital marketing of unhealthy foods, particularly, together with the presentation of the KidAd study and asking them for the participation and everything. And we did that both for the participants and for the parents. From that, we had a few dropouts, mainly because of iPhone. So the KidAd app, unfortunately, is only available for the Android phones for the moment, which was a bit of a pity because out of all these people that we had in the schools, many of them were really interested in participating, but unfortunately, that was quite of a big exclusion criteria. And as well, that required quite a lot of human resources from our side to do the presentations and to encourage the students to participate. So from that, in the end, we had about 37 participants that were eligible. And then we proceeded with the installation of the app, which in the end we were quite able to do so. We had just 5 participants that dropped out due to the fact that the app is not easily available, and the installation process requires quite a lot of IT training and understanding also from the researchers' side, which was quite difficult. And as well, if participants, for example, had parental control enabled in their phone, that was making the process more difficult. And so in the end, we ended up with the data of 32 participants, where we collected for about a week. There was some data collection interruption due to the application, but as well, sometimes we had some data loss because, well, we're not fully sure exactly what was the reason, but there was a misconnection between the phone and the server. So sometimes participants may have had X number of pictures on their phone, but there many less were transferred to the server. But anyway, this gives us a pool of around 106,000 pictures to be analyzed and to be also categorized, and where we can also assess the exposure during this time that they spend in social media. Yes, sorry. So regarding the improvements, so the KidAd app had already been previously used by Estonia a couple of years ago. And then there were some substantial improvements up to the point that we used it. And now we would like to also share some improvements for future member states that want to implement it or want to have the budget also to make these changes. And these have already been communicated with the WHO, but the main criteria we really think that could really improve is making this application available in iPhone as well as Play Store, providing a better way to improve the installation process, but as well the technical part. So there's no interruptions in the recordings, that there's no interruptions as well when there is a phone update or in the transfer to the server of the pictures. As well, as mentioned, so as researchers, the IT training we have is quite limited, and that also in a way difficulted the data collection process and the recruitment as well. So that in a way would be also interesting to have an easier way of dealing with that. So regarding the data analysis, to evaluate the exposure and also assess the categorization or characterization of the ads itself, whether they're healthy, not healthy, to who they are targeted to. Because we have a big number of pictures, we have a colleague that is also doing a PhD student both at Cienzano and Maastricht University that is conducting a validation study to understand whether AI models can be used to classify, to identify food brands, for example, or food categories or marketing strategies. So that can be used to facilitate also the monitoring process for example, that's regulation implemented. So at the moment, she has conducted this for online advertisements, so meaning that she downloaded advertisements that were in the Meta Ads library. And then she used 4 different AI models that we can see here in the table. So that would be Gemma, GPT, Pixtral, and Quen. And then she also asked 3 dietitians to also code these advertisements. And then she looked at the consensus between these. So what we can see here is, for example, that so AI models were more were missing less ads of So AI models were better at categorizing adult target ads compared to adolescent targeted ads. So in this way, it helps us to see where AI models may perform better and where there may be also scope or space to improve. So the idea is to also use these AI models to be used in the screenshots for the KidAd. So in this way, these 106,000 screenshots can already be also processed by the AI, but already having done a small sample of these in a validation study to compare also the feasibility and the recognition of ads from our side. Next, please. So here we can see another example with the classification of the WHO nutrient profile model 2023 categories. So here we can see that for the first, let's say, 5 to 10 categories, the AIs are performing quite well compared to the dietitian coding. Whether the last, let's say, 5 to 10, they're missing quite a lot of categories or not performing as well. Next one, please. So, so at the moment, we're going to be doing the AI validation study. So the idea is to validate with 2 dietitians that have coded a subsample of these 106,000 screenshots we were mentioning, and as well doing the same with 2 different AI models in a local environment. So it's more compliant for GDPR purposes, and this would be like Pixtral or Quen. And compared to previous validation studies here, we would have a first step that is quite relevant, which is identifying ads. Of course, the other validations studies were done only with advertisements. So all the images provided were advertisements, whether in this case, we have pictures, many pictures that maybe are not relevant, but some are including advertisements. So we will be doing that as well as identifying brand name, product category, length of exposure, as we may be able to identify the first and last frame of the same advertisement and says how long that might be. Food categories as well, marketing strategies, and also potentially target population. So this will be the validation study, and then by the end of this year, the idea is that by using these AI models, we're able to quantify exposure in these screenshots, and as well to identify the healthiness, marketing strategies, etc. that we have mentioned before. So that would be all. And yeah, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, we will also be very happy to answer them.
Many thanks, Charlotte and Nora, for this very interesting presentation. And I think we will have some questions for you at the end. So to conclude the session, I am honored to invite Catherine Armitage to help us reflect on the Digital Services Act And Catherine is Legal and Policy Officer for Advertising at the European Commission, DG Connect, where she works on advertising transparency and platform accountability under the Digital Services Act. She previously served as Director of Digital Policy at the World Federation of Advertisers and has extensive experience in European digital policy and regulation. So please, Catherine, it's really nice to have you with us today.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for inviting me to speak today. I will just bring up my slides. Okay, I hope you can see them. Yes, I've been asked to share a little bit about the Digital Services Act and the online advertising provisions within this regulation. I will start by going through some of the key provisions that may be relevant in this context. So the Digital Services Act is a piece of regulation that has a number of different provisions related to the regulation of online platforms with specific rules, particularly for very large online platforms that meet a certain number of users. But I'm going to just talk about one snapshot of the Digital Services Act, which is to talk about what rules are contained within this piece of regulation with regards to advertising on online platforms. So first of all, there is an article that prohibits the presentation of ads based on profiling using special categories of personal data. So I will talk about each of these in a bit more detail, but this one applies to all online platforms and is really focused on sort of reducing exploitation of, for example, vulnerabilities or use of special categories of data as defined in the GDPR. So this is things like health data, data about someone's sex life or sexual orientation, for example. Secondly, the DSA also prohibits online platforms from presenting ads on their services based on profiling using the personal data of minors when the platform is aware with reasonable certainty that the user is a minor. And then there are also transparency rules. So under the DSA, information has to be provided whenever you see an online ad, and that information includes things like who paid for the ad, so the name of the advertiser, and if it's different, the person on whose behalf the ad was presented, and also information, for example, about the targeting parameters that were used to select the audience who saw this ad. And then importantly, and I'll go into more detail on this later, the ad repositories. So the DSA requires the very large online platforms to have a publicly available and accessible repository that contains all of the ads that were presented on the platform over sort of more or less the past year. And within that repository, there needs to be information not only about the content of the ad, but also about how it was targeted, the targeting parameters, who the advertiser is, and various other elements, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So this is a kind of bird's eye view of the four key elements related to advertising in the DSA. So I mentioned advertising transparency, that this is a really core principle within the Digital Services Act, is to ensure that users and researchers have access to data and information about how online advertising is working on these platforms. So there's kind of two angles to this. First of all, there's the user-facing transparency, which is in Article 26.1, and then there's transparency, which can be accessible to users, but also more relevant to probably researchers looking at this from a more macro perspective. So Article 26.1, this is what I was talking about before. So whenever a user sees an ad, they should be able to easily access information about, for example, who the advertiser is and why they are seeing this ad. So this should be, something that they should also be, just to mention, should also be able to see that this is an ad. So there should be a clear label that says, for example, this is an ad. And then there should be the possibility to see or to click and then be able to read information about the name of the advertiser, who paid for the ad, the targeting parameters that were used to present the ad in this specific instance, and also information about how to change those parameters if available. Then on Article 39, this only applies to very large online platforms. The previous one applies to all online platforms, but the very large online platforms all must now have advertising repositories that are available to the public, that provide information about all of the ads that have been posted on those platforms. And the purpose of this article is really to enable better supervision and research into some of the risks posed by advertising. And this is actually a very important part of the DSA. We have seen researchers and academics and all sorts of groups actually using these repositories now to draw very, very interesting conclusions and to do very important research on advertising in general in many different sectors. And that's because these repositories are available. As the Commission, we have been looking very carefully at how the very large online platforms have been implementing this article, and whether or not their repositories meet the standard which the DSA requires. And we have taken some enforcement action with regards to this article as well over the past few months. So this is a very important one, and I would encourage anyone on this call to let us know actually how, if you are using those repositories for any research or any other work that you're doing, what is your experience of using those repositories? Has it been helpful? Has it not? Are there barriers to getting access to the information that is required into the DSA? Because this is very important. And ad targeting and personal data. So there are two relevant provisions in the Digital Services Act that were introduced in relation to how ads can be targeted to users. So Article 26.3 prohibits online platforms from presenting ads based on profiling using special categories of personal data. So as I mentioned before, this article draws on the definition of special categories of personal data in the GDPR. So I mentioned some of the categories before: health, health data, information about someone's sexual orientation, political beliefs, religious beliefs, and many others. It also draws on the definition of profiling also, which comes from the GDPR. So this idea of ads based on profiling is a slightly I suppose it was introduced in this article, and it really references back to the automated processing. I think the definition of the GDPR is something around the automated processing of personal data to analyze or predict aspects relating to an actual person, for example, predicting their preferences or their behaviors. Then Article 28.2, it prohibits online platforms from presenting ads based on profiling using the personal data of minors when the online platform is aware with reasonable certainty that the user is a minor. Again, it's similar to the previous article. It's drawing on the GDPR definitions of ads based of profiling. And the purpose of this is that it aims to ensure a high level of protection for minors on platforms. The Digital Services Act also has a separate article, Article 28.1, that is more general around ensuring that online platforms ensuring that they protect minors. But this one is very specific to advertising under Article 28.2. And finally, when it comes to systemic risks in advertising, this is kind of one of the core concepts that was introduced in the Digital Services Act, that very large online platforms must identify and mitigate systemic risks that come from the platform itself. And those providers of those online platforms are required to carry out annual risk assessments that cover a very, very wide range of different aspects of how their platforms function. And one of the things that is mentioned specifically in Articles 34 and 35 is the advertising systems. So those risk assessments are very wide ranging, but they should, according to this article, look specifically at advertising systems as a risk factor. And then in cases where, for example, they may have identified that there are some risks stemming from the advertising system of the platform, then those platforms would be required to put in place effective mitigation measures, which could include, for example, adapting those advertising systems or taking targeted measures to limit or adjust the presentation of ads on the platform as well. And the notion of systemic risk in the Digital Service Act is, there are several specific systemic risks mentioned in Articles 34 and 35. This is not an exhaustive list, but some of the risks that are mentioned in those articles include systemic risks to the protection of public health and minors, risks that could lead to serious negative consequences to people's physical and mental well-being, also risks to the exercise of fundamental rights, and there are a number of different fundamental rights mentioned in those articles, but they include, for example, the right to a high level of consumer protection, data protection, rights of the child, and also non-discrimination. Other systemic risks that are mentioned include, for example, dissemination of legal content, civic discourse, election processes, public security, and gender-based violence. But I think probably the first three on that list are most relevant in this context. So this is kind of a very quick overview of the Digital Services Act. I'm aware that we are running quite close to time, so I'm happy to cut it here. And I don't know if there is still time for any questions, but very happy if anyone wants to reach out to discuss this further. Thank you.
Many thanks, Catherine. And actually, we are approaching the end of this session, but I think we still have some time for discussion and for Q&A. And we received some questions in the chat, but which have already been addressed by Mimi and Magda. So thank you for that. I cannot see any further question in the chat, but I have some questions, and maybe we can have a very short discussion regarding the different presentations that we have. I think I will have a question to Catherine, and considering your presentation, and in particular regarding the articles 34 and 35, how can we use these articles to improve the restriction of unhealthy food advertising to children? Do you see any possibility to use these articles to have a better approach in order to have a better protection of children regarding the exposure to this content that we consider that is harmful for their health?
Yeah, so the DSA requires, as I mentioned, assessment and mitigation of risks to, for example, public health, mental and physical well-being, amongst others. And it would need to be analysed probably in light of very concrete circumstances whether the dissemination of certain ads can cause such risks. So in fact, we would very much welcome any relevant efforts and outputs from you or the members of this group that could be relevant to support this analysis. You know, for example, particularly any empirical insights that you might hold or generate. So this is, but it really needs to be a case-by-case assessment. But in that light, you know, we would very much welcome hearing more from you and your members, particularly, you know, the presentations today have themselves been very insightful, for example. So we're very interested in hearing more about what research is done in this space and how that would link to whether or not the dissemination of certain types of advertisement could cause or impact such risks.
Many thanks, Catherine, and this is good to know, and we'll try to have a meeting later on to discuss how we can contribute on that. We have now Mimi asking the floor. Please, Mimi.
Thanks so much. And my question is for Catherine as well. And actually delighted to hear that you're, you know, interested in learning more about results of ad studies like these. But I'm sort of curious about Article 39, because these repositories were something that obviously when they first appeared was something that have clear, phenomenal potential for researchers, because as we all know, digging into advertising and general stuff on online platforms is a big job. But what we find in relation to the food marketing stuff certainly is that there's very little there. And it's quite strange. So when we go into do our landscape studies where we look to see what's actually currently being advertised in a particular region, and we see these ads available on accounts that are for that region, for, you know, big brands, and then we go into the repository and there's nothing in the repository, and so, you know, or you get a notice saying there's nothing in this region at this time, that kind of a thing. And this is not just a sort of a once-off thing. In fact, it was something we discussed with WHO, with the non-communicable diseases unit, and with Kremlin and with Tobin Ireland, who did a lot of media-related work for them, and came to the conclusion that, you know, for this sector anyway, there isn't any sort of a reliable sort of repository that we can work with. So it might be something that we could explore further. It's been a couple of years since I last looked at it, so I don't know whether things have improved, but I'm not aware of any improvement having taken place since then.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear. I think that the requirement of the DSA is that all of the ads that are presented only on the very large online platforms. So this would cover, for example, YouTube. It would cover Snapchat, TikTok, some of the platforms that were mentioned earlier. And Article 39 requires that all of the advertisements that have appeared on the platform should be available in the repository for the entire period during which the ad is presented, and until 1 year, I think it is, after the ad was presented for the last time on the interface. So if you are encountering situations where you're seeing ads that are being presented to a user, but then they're not in the repository, it would be very interesting to receive, you know, that where you see those discrepancies, which platforms, and even specific examples could be very useful and helpful for our supervision and enforcement tasks.
Okay, cool. I feel another validation study coming on. Thanks, Catherine. That's helpful.
Many thanks. And now, Charlotte, please.
Yes, I think it's also a question for Catherine. It's related, but maybe I missed it, or I had the feeling that I went to a conference a while ago and they were talking about it. The point related to age verification, that they would eventually work on a system to enforce age verification, because now, as we saw in different presentations, for example, like they can enter a different like birth date, and then like they wouldn't be 18 instead of their actual age. So has it been any improvement also on this, or did I miss something related to that?
Yeah, so this is not a topic that I'm working on myself. So I actually would suggest that we could take this as a follow-up, and I can reach out to the colleagues who are working on this actually themselves, and then provide you with an update separately.
Perfect, thanks.
So many thanks for this discussion, and I think it's now time to end this session. I would like to thank all our speakers for their valuable contributions and for making this webinar both informative and inspiring. And in the chat, you will find a link to a brief questionnaire to help us assess the impact of this webinar. And we would greatly appreciate if you could take a moment to complete it. So thank you again, you all very much for your participation.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.